So, we have just seen that there are some issues like cyber that affect everyone. They don't necessarily discriminate, but there are other security challenges that do actually have disparate effects on different groups, depending on their gender or their religion or their race or some other factor. So our next segment is going to focus on this concept of identity and how that shapes our perceptions of security, and the importance of having diverse people in security policymaking to help account for that. So to kick us off, we're going to start with a special interview of the U.S. Undersecretary of the Air Force, the Honorable Gina Ortiz Jones, who was the first gay woman of color and a military veteran running for office back in 2018 in Texas. She's also a first-generation American and has a really interesting perspective to share on diversity and identity. She will be interviewed by Taya, who is a young ambassador of Italy from the organization Inspiring Girls International, which is a really cool organization that looks to raise the aspirations of young girls by connecting them with role models around the world. So take a listen to their conversation about the Undersecretary's own path to being a leader in national security.
Hello everyone, I'm Tam. I'm the Italian ambassador for Inspiring Girls. Today I have the huge honor to get to speak with the Undersecretary of the U.S. Air Force, Gina Ortiz Jones. Good evening.
Hi Tia, how are you?
I'm really good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Very excited to be speaking with you. And when I think about how I enjoy spending my time, ranking right up there is speaking to the next generation, and certainly given world events, talking about the importance of NATO moving forward. So really looking forward to this conversation.
I completely agree with you. I'm really excited to get to have this conversation. So my first question for you is that every day as the Undersecretary of the U.S. Air Force, I personally assume might represent new challenges or new possibilities. So can you possibly describe a day of your job for us? And which are the aspects of your job that most challenge you or reward you?
Yeah. Well, Tia, thank you again for hosting this. And I must say, when I start my morning, I actually start through obviously walking to my office, and it's not lost on me every morning still, right? Almost 10 months into this, the feeling of awe that I have when I walk through the halls of the Pentagon. Not only as I think about those that came before me, but then as I also think about frankly, the power I have, the power that those of us in these positions entrusted to lead at these levels have to make sure that we've got the best airmen and guardians, as well as making sure that they've got the resources to be successful, as well as making sure their families are also well cared for. So I must say that starting that off every morning with a walk-in is truly inspiring and very humbling. Every morning, though, the Secretary and I, we also get an intelligence briefing, and it shows us, it really kind of lays out those things that challenge or potentially try to challenge our ability to maintain air superiority and space superiority. The Department of the Air Force includes both the Air Force and the Space Force. So as we think about threats moving forward and opportunities and challenges, we think about those in the air domain and in the space domain. And so the Department of the Air Force, the Secretary is charged with, organizing, training, and equipping. And what that means is, how is the force ready for those challenges in terms of investments, long-term investments that we need to make, as well as maintaining certain capabilities in the short term, given what may arise. Certainly, as what's happening in Russia and Ukraine are showing us. Threats to our democracy and threats to security are never going to go away. So how do we make sure we've got enough capacity there? But every day is again just a wonderful opportunity to make sure that our airmen and our guardians have what they need to be successful, that we're retaining the best talent, that we're also recruiting the best talent. So it's really a balance between ensuring we're preparing for the high-end fight, as well as making sure our people can serve to their full potential. So I'll tell you, I spent a lot of time kind of thinking about the budget, but a lot of my day is really spent asking three questions, right? Which is why not, and where's the data, right? This again is about how we make investments, but also are we ensuring that we've got policies that ensure that all of our airmen and guardians can serve to their full potential. So I must admit that is really probably the most rewarding part of this job for me, is ensuring that we've got the best talent, we're keeping the best talent, and we're preparing our airmen and our guardians and our civil servants to be successful in the high-end fight.
I find your job to be really interesting, and I can only imagine how much effort you've put in to get where you are today. You went from joining the US Air Force to working at the Defense Intelligence Agency, serving in the office of the US Trade Representative, running for Congress, and now you're serving as the US Undersecretary for the Air Force. Can you possibly tell us how you got where you are today? And what's your biggest piece of advice for young people that are just joining the service or even other career paths?
Yeah, well, Tia, when I think about my own story, I mean, it's certainly when I've been honored to the number of ways in which I've been honored to serve our country, kind of in and out of uniform. But really, what also has helped me and to help me get to where I am is my family's story. And I'm a proud first-generation American. My mom actually came to the U.S. As a domestic helper. She graduated from the #1 university in the Philippines, but wanted a chance at the American dream. And so she just reminded my sister and I every single day that we were very lucky, not smart, right? We were very lucky to be born in this special country, and we'd have to give back to a country that has given us so much. And so, that personal experience is really what has motivated me to commit my life to a life of public service. And so it's always been about, how can I best serve? How can I give back to a country that has given me and my family so much? And I think through national defense and my time in the intelligence community has only shown me frankly again the importance of American leadership. It's indispensable. Again, it's not something that we can face our challenges and our opportunities singularly, though, right? Again, we do these with our partners and our allies, and we do it through institutions like the NATO alliance. And so again, really, it's an honor to serve, and it's an honor to make sure that those behind me have the same exact opportunities to serve to their full potential. I will say, when I served in the Air Force, I served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which at the time was a policy that said you could serve as a member of the LGBTQ community, but you could not be open about who you are. And I think, as we think about, again, the challenges and opportunities that we face as a country and as an alliance, we need all hands on deck. Right? We need everybody giving their 150% every single day. And so now to be able to serve as the 27th Undersecretary of the Air Force, where I have a direct role in making sure that we have the best and brightest coming in to the Department of the Air Force, and as well as making sure we take care of their families appropriately, it's truly an honor.
As someone from a newer generation, I love the message of equality and inclusivity that you give off. But unfortunately, there are many people that aren't as positive. So I was just wondering, as a woman that comes from an immigrant family, have you ever had to overcome setbacks or discriminations based off your ethnicity or gender? And if so, how did you manage to do that?
I think you've always, regardless of what path you select, right, and how you choose to spend your time and dedicate your kind of your energies, I think you've got to be very clear about why you are doing that, right? Because that's going to sustain you. Because to your point, there are always going to be folks that kind of question kind of how you got there and why you're there, and frankly whether you deserve to be there, as if that has anything to do with them. And it really doesn't. And so you've got to be clear about why you're doing things. And for me, it's again about being driven about public service and making sure those opportunities that I had, that I similarly give back and make sure that those behind me have those same, if not better, opportunities to serve. Again, because American leadership is indispensable, and it's too important to the not only to our national security, but to global security. And so I would give the piece of advice that if anyone ever asks me for career advice, I tell them the same three things. One, you got to be kind, right? Be kind. Don't be a jerk. No one likes a jerk. Secondly, you've got to work hard, right? Don't get outworked. So make sure that I didn't say, work smart, but also work hard. Don't work hard just for working hard's sake. Make sure that you are working hard, but doing so in a smart way. And then lastly, you've got to be so good they cannot ignore you. right? Be so good they cannot ignore you. I think those three things, really, regardless of what you're doing, whether you want to be a lawyer, you want to serve in the military, you want to do both of those things at the same time. I think regardless of the career path you choose, those three things, I think will serve you well. I hope they do, at least in the way that they've served me well.
Again, I just find your message so inspirational. It's just amazing. The last question I have for you today, but definitely not the least important one, is what's something you wish your younger self would have known before entering the Army that you know now?
Sometimes when you are new, certainly to the workforce or new to an environment, you can maybe be a little bit scared to ask questions. But I think if you've done your homework, right, and if you've put in the work to better understand as best you can, I think the best thing that you can do for yourself and for the organization is to ask those tough questions, right? Because it is in the interest of doing a good job, in the interest of best serving the organization. And sometimes, again, you bring a different lived experience. And so that experience, is as important as any other. And that'll come across in the questions that you ask. And then certainly then but don't be afraid of the answer, right? Because then if you get the answer, you've got to be able to have the courage to take the action to move out on that. I think secondly, trust your gut, right? Trust your gut. You know what you've done to prepare yourself for that moment to serve and to excel. And so if something doesn't feel right, trust your gut and make sure that that you can frankly look yourself in the mirror every evening, every morning, and say that you've done your absolute best.
I just want to end this interview by saying that this has been one of the most honestly inspirational conversations I've ever had. It's been a huge honor getting to speak to you. You're a very interesting person, and it's been amazing. Thank you very much for this.
Well, thank you, Tia. I mean, this is a really important conversation, certainly given the time. But I think when we always think about inspiring the next generation, certainly into public service, but also reminding them of the values that we hold dear as a democracy and what it takes to sustain that, right? This doesn't just kind of go on in perpetuity without threats. And so reminding ourselves of why NATO is important, why the next generation understands it's important is so critical. So I want to thank you for your leadership and stepping up today.
I truly believe that having a conversation between generations is one of the most important things we can do. So I completely agree with you. It's been absolutely amazing. Thank you everyone for watching. And again, thank you, Undersecretary, for having this conversation with me. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you so much to Taya. That was a great preview for our discussion. We're going to stick with these issues about gender and identity in security and peace with our next panel, which is full of inspiring women, so many. It's honestly staggering. I'm so honored to be on the stage with all of you. We also have two speakers that are joining us virtually. We're going to dive deeper into some of the issues that the Undersecretary and Taya raised. But before I hand it over to Daria Nashat, the co-founder of Women in Politics, who will be our moderator for this session, we're going to see a quick video that is a snapshot of some of the work that one of our panelists, Shiran, is leading with the Listen to My Voice campaign. She will explain more about this in the panel, and we'll have an opportunity to talk about it, but we'll see the video first. And just a quick warning to everyone, this is about domestic violence, which may be triggering to some, but I please encourage you to take a listen to this video, and then I will have Daria pick us up. Thank you.
I was Michal Sera. In 2019, I was murdered by the man who was my husband, the killer, Eliran Malul. And today, after I lost my life, I call on you. Listen to my voice. If you are in a relationship, or were in a relationship, and he is jealous and obsessive towards you, if you are afraid of his reaction to parting from you, share with a close person and a domestic violence expert who will help you separate safely and return to your light. Listen to your gut feeling. Do it today. Listen to my voice. Listen to your voice.
Hello and welcome, everyone, and good afternoon, good morning to those coming from the virtual space. Hello, I see we have our other speakers joining us virtually. Welcome as well. I'm Daria Nashat. I'm the co-founder of Women in Politics, and I'm also a steering committee member of WISE Brussels. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and I am thrilled to have amazing speakers on this panel today. I would like to introduce them I will start with Irene Fellin, who is the new Special Representative at NATO for Women, Peace and Security. A warm welcome. I will continue with Shiran Mlamdovsky-Somech. She's the Vice President of Impact DID and also the entrepreneur behind the Listen to My Voice campaign, which we just saw one video of. And I would like to welcome, of course, as well, Samina Ansari. She's the founding director of Aviana Diplomacy and a senior consultant at Vector Consulting. And now I would like to welcome our guests and speakers joining us virtually. I would like to welcome Miriam González Durántez, founder and chair, Inspiring Girls International. She is the person behind the campaign hashtag This Little Girl Is Me. A warm welcome to you as well. And of course, Cori Fleser, non-resident senior fellow at the Snowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, Atlantic Council. A warm welcome to all of you. I would invite you to give a round of applause to our speakers and a warm welcome as well. It is such a pleasure to be here today, and we are going to speak about women, gender, identity in peace and security. Gender and identity play an important role in how we experience security and how we are affected by instability, violence, and war. And in this session, we want to explore how security and peace can become more inclusive so that everybody is safe and secure. With other words, how do we create inclusive cultures and systems that ensure peace and security for all? How can we ensure that those who are most affected by insecurity and violence are at the core and become the co-creators of 21st century security architectures that serves all equally? How do we move from distrust and polarization today to communities of belonging, which make everyone feel safe? And what different ways do we have? And this is where we come to our distinguished panel and speakers. What ways do we have to do it differently? Are there any new ideas, innovative approaches, tech? We've seen something dealing with the tech, the possibilities to use tech. So I'm very thrilled, again, to have 5 experts and speakers with me who will share very briefly some of their lessons and insights, and we will then open for questions, and we hope to have a very interactive conversation together on this important topic. Irene, I would like to start with you. You are the new special representative here at NATO, and I am curious if you could share how does conflict disproportionately affect women and girls, and what is NATO doing about this? Why does it matter to NATO?
Thank you, Daria. Thank you very much. So I'm very pleased to be here with you today. You said I'm new. Yes, I joined NATO in my current capacities in January, but I have to say that I rejoined NATO because I used to work here around 10 years ago when maybe I was not young, but I was certainly younger than today. The fact I belong to a different generation is because I come with my papers on the stage instead of tablets or technology. But for me, it's extremely important to engage with you, and I will come back to this maybe later. because I would like to frame around the question you made, why is this important for me, for us, and for the alliance I represent here today working on this agenda. I'm sure that many of you, I know some of you personally that are familiar with the Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, but maybe not all you are so. So let me just explain in 2 words why this is important. It was already introduced that security is different for the population, for the individuals, and for the communities. And this is due to our role, the role we play within the society, the gender role, the role, so the expectations that are built within a given society on what people, the others, expect from us as men and women in the way this is constructed. So what are the expectations and how we should feel about this. The point is that we as an individual, we are have specific needs, and how we perceive society is something very different. And then the genders are more complex and diversified. It's not just a binary system. So talking about women and men is the starting point where that's started in a binary way, but then we have to add the intersectionality and the different components to have really an inclusive approach. And if we look at the conflict and how this have a different impact on women and men, I would like to take 2 examples that are also connected with the current situation in Ukraine. We all heard about the terrible war crimes that are going on, especially related to conflict-related sexual violence. This is nothing new, unfortunately. If we look back at the history, this has been a component of many conflicts, I would say of all conflicts. This affects women and girls most in a higher way, but doesn't exclude men and boys as well. And the point is that this is really used as a tactic of war to harm women, and then to use the women to harm the entire society. And this is one of the elements we need to take into consideration when we analyze the conflict and we have to develop solutions. But I would like to take another example as part of the conflict analysis when we want to provide some help, humanitarian aid to a conflict. The UN released some data about the women who are going to deliver in these months in Ukraine under the conflict, and they said last month that they were expecting 80,000 women to deliver. You know that after you deliver, the stress caused by the stress generally, if you have under stress, the possibility that you can breastfeed and produce milk is limited because the body reacts to the stress. This means that giving birth in the underground or under the bombs will have as a consequence, most probably, the fact that women will not and mother will not be able to breastfeed their children. So imagine the situation of women in Mariupol giving birth underground where they cannot receive any food, not only for themselves, but they cannot even feed their newborn children. So this means that when we as institution, international organization, analyze a conflict and need to provide solutions, we need to have this gender-inclusive conflict analysis, which means asking ourselves, what are the different needs of men and women in that given situation? Because we are different when women and the different, or the genders that are there, the different people. And this was also a point I would like to raise, because we often talk about women as a target, but as I said, gender are multiplier. The fact that men couldn't leave the country in Ukraine because of the martial law, because of the fact men between 18 and 16 were requested to stay and defend the country, there was no gender analysis in that sense. So we can also understand why the circumstances, the emergency, but we are here for discussing and trying to understand how we can do our business better. Transsexual people were not taken into consideration, so all men, all individual born men were requested to stay. And so this is one of the elements when we say the need of having a gender analysis of the conflict, why this is important to take it into all the aspects into consideration. And so that's I think, wanted to give some example on how this is important at general level. And of course, NATO has developed some policies that are applying to what NATO does. So how do we respond to conflict, and how do we prepare our collective defense to take into the gender perspective into consideration?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes, and to get a different perspective, complementary from within NATO, and perhaps the question, what can NATO do to Samina? You know, what can organizations do to actually ensure that this problem is being addressed? If you would like to share some thoughts on this.
Absolutely. And I think that just building on some of the points that were addressed here, I mean, gender is not about womanhood. And when it comes to women in peace and security, women are not only victims, but they're also actors. And I think we need to do more work and actually shifting the narrative, speaking about women in war as like, you know, only as actors that are being violated, but actually also speaking about how we can empower them. And just sharing some experiences from my work in Afghanistan, one of the key things that I realize in my work is that when we speak about gender and identity, we forget that we're actually talking about diversity. And we're talking about diversity in the mind more than anything else. And how can we actually include this diversity in identifying solutions, finding sustainable ways to work towards peace, but also for NATO as an institution to see how we can use diversity to build technology, to build better ways of actually supporting the nations that we're involved in. And I think for NATO, it's an institution that is an incredible role model for so many nation states, and to change the language that goes from victimhood to actor, and also at the same time finding ways to look at this the way that, for instance, private sector does right now in more and more countries, where they see this as a systematic project, and they see it as a very active project, because we need to start by measuring what does it really mean for us, and then moving on from that to actually work step by step on ways to include minds and also ways to find diverse solutions, because we live in a complex world and we need everyone on board to tackle some of the challenges that we're faced with.
Thank you so much. Yes. I would like to continue and also ask Cori to share your views on this. What can organizations and institutions do to better address this issue, and perhaps share some of your findings and insights with us?
Well, good morning from Washington, D.C., and good afternoon to you all in Brussels. And thank you again to NATO and CIFA for the invitation to participate on this truly impressive panel of experts and for organizing this important summit. I wanted to use my opening comments to reflect on a few things I've learned that I think help transform institutions like NATO to account for these intersecting identity characteristics, gender being among them, and this nexus that they have with security. My colleagues on the panel have spoken eloquently about why these issues are important, so the focus of my comments shifts more towards what institutions can do. And so I'll say up front that ultimately I think we're trying to transform these institutions from within, recognizing that they are often being pushed to transform from outside the organization by civil society. And I think this is where civil society plays a key role. You know, civil society is vast and diverse, and it includes these very important actors that help tell defense institutions where they need to be and what they need to do to get there. So I'll highlight 3 actions among many that I think help the perspectives of civil society transform these institutions beyond the continued dialogue they conduct on a regular basis, which is very important to continue. So first, defense institutions need dedicated people who are smart on the issues, smart on navigating the organizations they work for, and serve as internal allies to civil society actors. You know, when I first started working on women, peace, and security for the military, I felt confident about my ability on, or my knowledge on gender and security. But what I realized is that knowing where to insert that knowledge into the bureaucratic processes that drive the organization is another important skill needed among those of us who work inside these institutions. And so for civil society actors, I think it's helpful to leverage these internal allies who work to understand the processes that drive the organizational change. I think this is absolutely key, this relationship between these two. My second point is on policy. Establishing policy for an organization that tells it what something is and what the organization must do is absolutely necessary. I can't overstate this. Putting words on paper matters for these large institutions. And yes, I know that drafting policy and getting it published may be painstakingly slow. It also might be a little boring. And I know this is sometimes difficult because organizational change is hard for defense institutions in particular. But the example I always come back to is that because of my age, I will only ever know a NATO that has a women, peace, and security policy. And that's because the policy was published before I graduated from university and entered the professional workforce. So I've always worked with a NATO that knew its position on women, peace, and security. And with this in mind, I often remind myself that sometimes we don't write policy for the people currently in the organization. Yes, it does help them too, but establishing policy is particularly important for those who inherit the organization, so the next generation, because it gives this generation a starting point to continue advancing that cause. And then the final point, and I want to emphasize this, is that policy in paper is only as good as it's implemented. And that's where I think resources are certainly needed. If we want defense institutions to actually implement these important considerations for security, the organizations must fund it. And this is where I think the role of national governments gets involved. They can earmark dedicated funding to their defense institution for these issues. And defense institutions can also request funding from their governments for them. So these resources then in turn can be used to hire those dedicated staff to help implement the policy in the various ways described. And I know this is constantly the most difficult part because we're always in environments of competing resources, but I do really think that it's a key critical step. If defense institutions are truly serious about incorporating unique and different perspectives into how they operate, they must be resourced to do so. So in sum,
Thank you.
Dedicate people, establish policy, and secure resources. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to participate in the question and answer session.
Thank you for raising these important issues, and I hope we can come back to them as well in the discussion that will follow. I would like to invite Shiran to share some of her work, which we already saw a little bit of at the very beginning. How are you using technology? What is it that you do, and how do you empower women and girls by using technology? Would you like to share with us?
Sure. Thank you, Daria. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you all these young faces here. So I would like to share how we use AI technology and media to create social impact, and even give you some inspiration to do it yourself or within your organization. A warning trigger, I'm going to talk about domestic violence. It's a bit hardcore content. So in the video that you saw, I want you to meet Michal Sela. Michal Sela, her story is one of the most important and fascinating stories in Israel. Michal got everything for her life. She was 32 years old. She came from a loving family. She was very smart, full of joy. She had a lot of friends. She was a qualified social worker. She lived in a nice village near Jerusalem. She was married and had a baby daughter. She lived her life like she was a colorful flying butterfly. However, 2.5 years ago, her husband stabbed her to death in front of her young baby. For her family and close friends, it was completely shocked. It seems like it came from nowhere. And I know it's difficult, but this is exactly what we want to create in our video. We want to take people out of the comfort zone. We want them to look in those women in the eye and listen to the children's story. And this is how we triggered and create emotional reaction. And this is why this campaign was very effective.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that. We have another speaker here who has set up a campaign to empower women and girls. And I'd like to invite you, Miriam, to also share, what inspired you and how did you organize your campaign to achieve more girls and women to be empowered and to feel strong in our world.
Thank you so much, and I'm sorry I cannot be with you in person today, but let me frame a little bit where we see this debate from Inspiring Girls, and perhaps to say that out of the whole range of issues that we are discussing today, what we focus on is women, and women in peace and security, so I will talk particularly about that. But from where I see it, the issue is that when it comes to security and to peace, women tend to suffer disproportionately when there isn't peace and security. And crucially, that is not given the priority that it should be given. So that is, to me, the core of the problem. And we can see it in many different examples. I always, because I'm somebody who the other side of my life, I do international trade. I tend to focus on something that is a key instrument of foreign policy, which is sanctions. You would see lots of countries, and sanctions are very fashionable now, you will see lots of countries taking sanctions imposing sanctions for lots of different reasons. Pretty much no country, including all the NATO countries, imposes sanctions because of systematic, persistent, systemic violations of the right of women that are human rights. So you could find, like those examples, many others. NATO is doing an enormous amount of wonderful work in this area, but we are still quite far away. To us, the question is, why is that happening? And we think that one of the reasons why those aspects are not given the priority that they should be given, it is that we do not have enough women in positions of leadership raising those priorities and ensuring that they are put in the focus of everybody. And that is very clear when we come to women in positions of leadership, and the amount of women altogether, not even in positions of leadership, in the military, whether it is in politics and the political bodies that are taking the decisions. And that is only a reflection of what happens in society, that in some sectors there are many more women, but when you go higher up, you tend to lose them. And that is the area where we try to work. If you look at the ranges of women in the military, for example, in NATO, in different countries, kind of from 0.3 to 20-something%, well, we are 50% in society. So obviously we have an issue in that respect. How do we change that? And that is where we work. We think that you can change that with the power of role models, making sure that we break the stereotypes. And the defense area and the security area is one of the areas where you find most stereotypes. It is not only because there may be legislation in some country that prevents women from having those roles, it is that even in countries where you don't have those obstacles, you do not get enough women because it is perceived that that is an area of men, that men protect and that women are protected, that patriotism, that nobility, that courage is a value of men, and that runs very deeply in many societies. And I should say that those of you who think that that is only happening in the past, it is happening now. Where I am based, for example, right now in the US, there is a whole debate on reclaiming masculinity and those values as masculine values. So what we do in Inspiring Girls is to try to put together women who are already in those roles, with girls so that they can tell them about their story, they can inspire them, they can answer any questions they have, they can show them all together the different roles that women have. And I can assure you, I have spent 8.5 years working very intensely in this area. Many girls have no idea of the different roles that you have in this area, what you could be doing. They tend to think about the military in a very stereotyped manner again. They don't know anything about the roles on data, on research, on space, on cybersecurity, on intelligence. So we show all that to them. It's very much like the interview that you have seen between Gina and Thea, but obviously with much more time to be able to get deeper into the issues. We do it in 28 countries, and we do it through a variety of means. So we send women back to schools, we do it in social media, we do it virtually, and one of those campaigns was the Little Girl Is Me campaign that it was super successful, and we would be delighted to do more of that.
Thank you so much, for sharing this. I was also inspired by your campaign, which I saw on social media a while back. Yes. I see there are already some questions coming in on my iPad here, and I wonder if there are questions in the audience here. Before I open the floor, I would like to give the opportunity to whether if you have a question for each other. Anything that you want to ask, anything that you would like, or something that came up while the others were sharing and speaking? The floor is yours.
I think I will just give the opportunity for people to ask questions if there are. But just a small point, how do you all feel the fact that we have very little diversity right here at this very panel? How do we feel about that?
I think this is an interesting point, what you say, because this is panel we are talking about women, for women, and there is no many here. So I think this is a very interesting point we should address in the next panel as well.
Would you like to comment?
For me, it's very interesting. I was sharing this, as I said, I came into my new role only 3 months ago, and I'm still in between my previous life and my new one. So in this situation where I see diversity and many topics coming in, I would like to have a very long conversation, because you see the diversity of the topics, but then you can see this fil rouge that where we know that there are all the same challenges, just that you have to address them with tailor-made solutions, but the problems are the same. But at the same time, also for me, it's now it's the role the role that NATO brings, how we address this agenda, and how important it is that this agenda is to take into consideration, and the Alliance is doing this, investing a lot. So I was glad to hear about mentioning the policies, because sometimes it's the frustration between the need to have the policies and then not to see enough implementation. We are all gone throughout this, but this is where we have to start the conversation about the language to frame this. And then what is important is that we don't stop there, that the organization doesn't stop by ticking the box and say, oh, yes, now this is done. No, this is just the beginning. But it's an important beginning, because if we don't frame the work, and then also that's a starting point, and we can build on that. As I said, I was here 10 years ago, and I can say that a lot of progress has been done by the Alliance, and of course at a global level as well. It's a trend. We see the agenda moving forward. Not enough. We know that we complain that it's not quick enough, but it's happening. And now to the meetings like this summit, it's important for me, because this is for me another turning point. This is where I see how the agenda and also NATO's commitment to this agenda can evolve again. Women, peace and security, important to keep the focus on women. This was just shared, the need to have more women in leadership position and everywhere. I mean, that's the key message, of course.
And if I may come in, because I have some questions on this exactly.
Okay.
So I want to come in. There is the question indeed of whether, the focus on women and security, and there is a question here on how is NATO tackling intersectional discrimination, and another question also, a person wondering, how can NATO help specifically to protect and include LGBTQ plus folks in countries that limit their freedoms? So it is about expanding the definition of what NATO is doing.
Sure. We are an alliance of 30 right now, allies with diverse culture and diverse, it's everywhere. So the alliance works by consensus. So when we adopt a policy, it's a policy with the language and the ideas that the 30 allies, and in the case of women, peace and security, is plus a number of partners, choose to, where there is consensus on what we want to do. And the way in this, our policies is to how women, peace and security and gender perspective can support NATO when we are mostly in operation, in our collective defense and cooperative security. How we do address this is in the diversity of men and women in a diverse perspective. When it comes to intersectionality or LGBTQI, this is not part of our policy as part of the women, peace and security policy and how this is implemented by the Alliance, but those are policy and work that the Alliance at NATO and the Secretariat I do in respect of the diversity. So there are the group of the staff working and addressing this as part of the diverse gender and diversity offices, which is separate from the portfolio I am following.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any questions in the audience? Yes, please. I see one, and then, yeah.
Oops. Okay, I'm gonna. You are too high, Sophia.
Hi everyone, my name is Sophie, I'm Ukrainian and I work as an independent consultant and I focus on women, peace and security and feminist foreign policy agenda. And my question is related to the question I have been asking myself for the past 2 months, is how do we ensure that what is happening in Ukraine right now and the whole issue of militarization of NATO allies still keeps on the agenda the values we have related to women, peace and security agenda, the human security. And I'm sure that some of the participants here have the same question of, with a lot of, with the rising priority of militarization and arms control, how do we keep the human security question at the table?
Thank you so much. I would like to open the floor, and I also know that Samina, you've been working on human security as well, but anyone who would like to comment?
I mean, I think that the example that I will be using is not a very successful one, because it is about the situation in Afghanistan that is completely forgotten these days. I have not read much about in the news what's happening in the country right now. But basically, NATO was in Afghanistan for almost 20 years, and there were great achievements. And one of the areas that the allies managed to actually do incredible work is in the field of empowering or creating the situation for Afghan women to empower themselves. And I think for a lot of Afghan women, the future right now is very unknown. And I don't know what the international community is doing to keep some of those gains alive. And I really hope that the fate of Ukraine is not the same. Because I think that as an alliance, when we engage with countries and we achieve incredible things, we also have to ensure, as individual nations, but also as an institution, that we continue to work on maintaining some of those gains.
Thank you so much. I have another question here, and then I haven't forgotten about you. Yes, I will go to this one. How does gender and sexual inequality within our institutions undermine an effective and cohesive security response? Anyone would like to address this question? I wonder if there is, if there's any data on this actually. You have been working also on human security and data collection, so I'm wondering, sex disaggregated data in the context of peace and security, are we using them already enough? Is that something that could perhaps help to tackle inequalities?
That's an important point, and we are using them, but not enough, for sure. So we are also, I think it's not become an automaton yet. So there is a need to do with, this is something we are working on within NATO, when we work across the lines with our colleagues so to ensure that the data we collect are disaggregated. But this is for the gender inclusive conflict analysis. This is absolutely necessary. But this is a problem everywhere, not only related to conflict, the lack of sex and gender disaggregated data, but then gender is not the only race, ethnicity, age. You know, when we talk about this, we cannot say one woman represents the entire women. The diversity we know among us, it's very important. So it's when we talk about having women participation at the peace negotiation table, it's just not that you take one woman as a token and you invite her to sit at the table, because she cannot be the voice and represent the entire world, feminine world. Of course, I mean, she could, if after like agreement and negotiation, but so diversity is extremely important. And data are as much important as policies. I think they are part of this framework we need to develop in order to provide a solid basis for our work.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm happy to build on that, because I think the question of data is incredibly crucial. And I think what data actually does is that it gives us a very neutral picture of where is it that we have pain points. And I think sometimes some of these pain points can be in ways that we can address them in a systematic way. Because right now, the question of inclusion and diversity is not a gendered war. It is, we have errors in systems and processes. And what are the errors and where are these errors occurring? And I think data can give us a much better picture of what needs to be done. And I think we need to continue to measure, whether it is at NATO or whether it is at NATO operations abroad or any other institutions, to continue measuring to see how far have we, how close are we to our goals, how far have we come, and what needs to change.
Thank you. Yes.
Perhaps I can add a little thing.
Yes.
To me, the only point to add to that is that data, of course, is crucial because there is a big risk in this area that there is a lot of action, but that not all that action moves the dial. So that is the key question that we need to keep asking ourselves. All the seminars, all the research, everything that we are doing, does it move the dial? And if it doesn't, what are we going to do differently? And we suffer from having a lot of activity sometimes in this area that does not really lead to any results. So we can only see that with data.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, so, wait, okay. I'm gonna leave it here. Thank you very much, first of all, for being here. It's amazing to see all these amazing women and learn from you all. My question comes from a perspective I have. So I'm the general manager of Bucharest Model NATO's 9th edition, which is a NATO simulations for teenagers in the world. Now, you talked about the importance of having women in leadership, and I want to ask you, what is an important quality, or maybe the most important quality a woman should have when she's in a leadership position, especially in a NATO setting or in a security setting? Thank you.
It's me?
Anyone. I would say it's also general. I think it could also be.
Yeah, it is general, yes.
I mean, I'm happy to answer that because I don't think that it is specific qualities that women, men, or other genders need to have in order to be good leaders. I think at the end of the day, it's about creating situations where you have equal opportunities for everybody. And I say this because in Afghanistan, I worked with female social entrepreneurs. And sometimes I felt that these women in Afghanistan were taking responsibility for the planet, for the people that we all have. And so at the end of the day, I think that regardless of your gender identity, it's all about access to resources. And I think once you have access to resources, then there's so many different types and forms and ways you can be a leader.
If I can add, so I think from my perspective, it's important for women to be aware of the existing bias, because sometimes we are not behave the same as men are doing, and we maybe feel not comfortable with it. And it's good to be true to yourself. Just bring your quality to the table and be aware that your quality is good enough. So you don't have to behave like a man. You don't have to argue and fight and be winning all the time with all argument. But you have your own way, and this is what you can bring to the table. And I think it's valuable. And this is the power of diversity and inclusion. There should be enough room for everyone.
Can I add two fingers to that, if I may? I do think about this constantly because I would like to be in a leadership role at some point in time in my future career. So I do think constantly about sort of what are these traits that I see in leadership that I want to emulate and kind of copy and repeat, and which ones would I rather just leave behind? And I know that leadership as a woman it's inherently gendered. Leadership is inherently gendered. Maybe we should just get that out on the table. And I'm really looking forward to maybe the next generation of rising women and people of different identity groups coming and redefining what leadership does look like. Because I think we have these historical models that are traditionally white, traditionally male, traditionally hetero. And I think that really does shape sort of what sort of values, behaviors, and things that they do. And so things that I recognize that I truly want to emulate are taking care of the people that I oversee as a leader. I think this is one thing of that maybe the Undersecretary of the Air Force emphasizes, being kind and taking care of people. And there's a way to do that while still, sort of maintaining the sort of leadership role that you have and being looked up to as a leader, but maintaining this idea of like transparency, openness, providing clear guidance to your people, asking clarifying questions and admitting maybe when you don't know the answer or you don't have the answer. And then I think also, trusting the subject matter expertise of the people on your team, because as a leader, you can't possibly be expected to know everything, or at least I hope you're not expected to know everything. And so I think it's particularly important to look across your team, like know how it's being composed, know what different subject matter expertises are being brought to bear by those different people, and knowing how to lift up their voices when they can really contribute to the mission that you're overseeing.
If I may add to that, and perhaps just to keep the debate going, because I'm one of those who believes that there is not a female way to do leadership that is different to the male way to do leadership, and that everything is related to the individual. And to me, the two characteristics that are crucial in leaders, no matter in which area, but also included on defense and security, is understanding risk and knowing how to deal with risk, and then perseverance. It takes a long time and you need to keep there trying. But the point that I wanted to make is that in this area, the issue is not only about having more women in leadership. It is about having more women, period, at all the different levels. And if you look at all the different meetings, the summits, for example, where it is very striking how many more men than women are. If you look at the second, third, fourth roles, there are still many more men than women. So it really goes at all levels. And we certainly in Inspiring Girls try to work not just with very successful women who are at the very top of the range, but in all the different levels, including those who are starting.
Thank you.
If I may to conclude, I think that's a very interesting debate that we are always having. Is it's a question of representation and numbers because we want to have women because we have the half of the society, or because we want women because we bring a different perspective as women and a different leadership style. I am from that team because I think that female leadership is different. Of course, there is the individual elements and specificity that can in. Not all women have the same style. Maybe their style sometimes is not good, but that's the individual part. But generally speaking, and based on my experiences, yes, I can say that based on my experience, there is a difference, and we could see this also in some how COVID crisis was managed different by female leaders, and how the task force in some countries and were only male-dominated or exclusively male, they didn't address some of the issues that women needed. So, and I suppose that having a female leader managing would have led to a different approach. So based on my experience, I mean, I share many of the points that were made before, the listening, caring, but keeping this balance that it's listening and caring about the others, but being a strong model at the same time, and not being afraid to be more empathic and to care about the people, and to bring this institutional cultural change. Institutions were made by men, but that's part of the history. We recognize that things are changing. And if we want to be part of this change, we have to recognize this as well. Society, families, our composition are different. So I give an example. The Italian people must know this. We have an astronaut, a female astronaut that left yesterday to go, Samantha Cristoforetti, back in the space. And she has 2 children. And in one TV show very recently asked, you have 2 children. Who will take care of the children? You are living for 6 months. Their father. I mean, it's a fact. I mean, she doesn't abandon the children in the middle of the streets. Now it's different. Women work in the same way men work. So if one of the parents lives, the other stay home. Look at the military. This is the same. If we want to enable women to be in the military, we need to enable the family, structure and the wealth to support both parents. So women think in this way and approach the dynamics and the problem in an holistic and inclusive way. Men do it less, and this is why you have special representative, because we still need to address this as a special issue, and it shouldn't be the case.
Yeah,
Thank
that
you.
is great. Yes, thank you. I would like to invite, we're coming to the close already. We could have continued for hours and days probably on this topic. So thank you very much. But I want to give everyone the opportunity to share something as a closing reflection, closing word, and perhaps even, since we are at a youth summit, if you could give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
I think for me, just going back to the question about data, 267 is the number of years it will take for men and women to come closer in terms of economic opportunity. So 267 years. And I was looking at this data and I was trying to figure out how far have we come since I have been on this planet. I am 30. And the last 30 years, women's income have only increased by 5%. And that progress is just insane to me. It's very, very slow if you compare it to progress in so many other areas, such as technology. So I wish I could tell my younger self that the topic that I was working on would not be relevant, but it's still very relevant today. And I think it will be relevant for another 30 years.
Thank you. And
so
the others, yes, and
yes.
we have to keep it short.
Yeah. I will keep it short,
yes.
And also I want to go back to your comment for my conclusion. You said about that we are not diverse panel, and it's came pumped into my head, and I really think data is important, and having the session of only for women, it's a good starting point, but I think we should be much farther than that, like we are in the second stage. And also related to the campaign that we made, what was so unique in it, that it was campaign from domestic violence, but however, because of our unique approach and how we use the technology, so we also engaged men. We were almost 50% of men visited in our website, and a third of the viewers were men. And if we want to really create a change, so we need to bring both gender together. This is the only way we create a real change. And to the younger me, so believe in yourself. There is a will, so there's going to be a way. And keep this in mind for along the way.
Thank you. Yes.
I would like to build on what you said on the NATO perspective. I mean, what you mentioned, working with men, that's for me, it's very important. And this is why it's important to engaging with you today. Because as part of my mandate in these coming years, I would like to work more on the youth peace and security agenda, which is a complementary agenda to the women peace and security based on Resolution 2250. And it was adopted in 2015. So 15 years later, 1325. So for me, it also represents a different perspective where the focus on women can be integrated with a focus of both young women and young men working together for peace and security.
Thank
so
you.
I would be very happy to see that. And to the young men, you just pick mine, believe in yourself and in your dream and exit your comfort zone. And that's, I think, it's very important because sometimes, you can see things from a different perspective and find that the solution is right there.
Thank you. And just two very short comments from our guests online. Yes.
I'll jump in and go. Oh, go ahead, Miriam. Go ahead, Miriam.
To me, the main message really is for young people to understand how powerful their voice is in this area, not just for young women, but also for young men. They have changed the debate in other areas, like the environment. I think that if they put their voice in this area, we can make the change that we are missing now. And the advice to my younger self could be undertake more risks. I think that many girls are brought up with fear of failure. We see that in the analysis. And we all have to understand that we cannot succeed if we don't fail.
Thank you. Yes, Cori, you have the last word.
A final quick comment. Thank you for giving it to me, a true honor. So 2 points. I would offer that, to really talk about gender is to talk about intersectionality. It must be intersectional when we talk about gender. It cannot be binary. It should and include things like race, ethnicity, religion, sexual identity, orientation, expression. These things are what it truly means to sort of holistically talk about gender and then looking at it from a conflict scenario. So I wanted to make sure that point was come across because I think that's particularly important when we start looking to the conflicts of the future. And the second point, things that I tell my younger self, I work on a team of 20 and 30-year-olds, and we always look across, our cubicles and say, go boldly. We encourage each other to take those risks, to take chances, not to self-edit, and to really show up who you are in the workspace, because I think that is what really forces institutions to accept the fact that there's a new rising generation of people coming into their institutions who want it to look differently and potentially account for a more comprehensive look at security and what it does. So I'll leave with that.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you. It was a real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you all so much. So inspiring. I'm glad we have a short break coming up after this because I think there's so much to process from this panel, and I'm really looking forward to have a chance to discuss with all of you. So for those of you who are in the room here, please feel free to grab a coffee, and you can go outside using these back doors over here. And everyone on home, stick with us. We'll be back in about 10 minutes at 12 p.m. Eastern Time and 6 p.m. CET. See you soon.